Hi, everyone. This is Shawn Smith. I'm here with Seirian Sumner, professor of behavioral ecology and author of the fabulous book Endless Forms: The Secret World of Wasps. Thank you so much for taking time today to talk with me about wasps.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk about wasps. So it's my pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. I like your shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I know it's
I
really
just noticed. Yes, nice. Um, so just kind of starting off here, what sort of started your love affair with wasps? Like where did that start for you?
it's entirely accidental. I have to confess, I didn't actually like wasps, let alone any other insects, really, when I started my PhD. I was always interested in behavior, animal behavior, why animals behave in the way that they do, mostly inspired by David Attenborough and, lovely meerkat, cute organisms on TV. Um, and I had this opportunity to study animal behavior for my PhD. It just so happened that the model organism was a wasp. And I was assured that these were very gentle wasps, they don't really sting. And in fact, it turns out they are these hover wasps from Southeast Asia. They're very gentle. They do live in a colony, but they don't. Their only mechanism of defense, if you come and scare them, they just literally drop off the nest and fly away.
Wow.
So they're a really good gateway wasp if you're trying to get into wasps. And it was just by studying them. So each one of these individual wasps in a society, we could mark each one individual. So we got individually. So we got to know each individual from birth through to death, and we knew exactly what she'd been doing in her life, and we could manipulate their behaviours by changing the conditions or removing individuals to test our ideas and theories on social behaviour and evolution. And it was pretty much lying on the floor of a Malaysian rainforest with a wasp nest just above my face that I fell in love with wasps. I realized actually these things are amazing. And then the more I realized that actually most people don't like wasps and don't know much about them, I actually thought, well, there's a niche here and somebody's got to fill it. Somebody's got to stick up for the underdog of the insect world. There aren't many scientists who do. I'm going to see what I can do for wasps. And the rest is history. 25 years later, I'm still studying them.
That's such a great story. I imagine that you have photos, like close-up photos of the nest, like right there with this distance of like, I don't know, a couple inches.
Yeah, I mean, these wasps in particular, you have to get up really close to them to be able to observe their behaviors because they're quite small. So the nests were literally, a few centimeters away from my face. But those sorts of wasps they won't fly off at you very often and they don't really sting. I would never get that close up to a Pellistes nest, for example, or a Vespula nest without some kind of protection. They're much
Sure.
more risk averse these days.
Yes. Yeah. Um, I guess like a question I run into when I talk to people about wasps is people champion bees over wasps. Why do you think that is for most people?
Yeah, so I had exactly the same question, and I got a bit annoyed with people saying, "Oh, why don't you study bees rather than wasps?" And even through the course of a conversation, telling people what I do for a living, studying wasps, they would kind of morph the word wasp into bee because they clearly felt very uncomfortable with the idea that anyone would spend their life studying wasps. And so a few years ago, we ran a study asking members of the public what they think about wasps, and we know for sure that people genuinely do hate wasps, and they hate wasps because they sting them. But bees also sting, right? So why should it be that wasps get such a bad rap for this, whereas people forgive bees for their sting? Um, and what we found was that the reason why people don't like wasps is because they don't really understand what they do. So the people have a really good understanding that bees are pollinators. And of course, we have this millennium long history of working with bees, the honeybees in particular, for their honey and their wax. And now more recently, we exploit them for their pollination services.
Sure.
And there's been a wider, sort of over the last few decades, there's been a wider growing interest from sparked by and fueled by the media really in helping people understand that bees, including wild bees, not just honeybees, are really important for pollination, both for our wildflowers and for our farmed crops. Um, but there hasn't been the same efforts for wasps. Now, wasps are also equally important in ecosystems. They are nature's pest controllers, so they regulate insect populations. They are really useful as pest controllers in crop farms. And yet this is little recognized by the public and indeed by scientists. So it's partly the scientists' fault that there are so few of us studying wasps, and particularly so few people studying the ecosystem services of wasps or wasps' contributions to people, that there isn't a lot of media coverage of what wasps do. And so it's no surprise that the public don't really get much exposure to the wonderful world of wasps. And as well as pest controllers, they're also pollinators and decomposers and providers of all sorts of potential medicinal products and nutritional products that we could be making more use of. So the fact that we don't understand enough about them is the reason why people cannot really get over the fact that a few wasps, and it's a very small number of species that interface with human life, end up giving them a bad reputation.
I think well, I can speak from being here in Texas that if I go into the computer and I just do an internet search for wasp, I think the first 30% of the tags that come down to how to get rid of, how to kill, what do they hate, and it's yeah, there's a lot of anger there, and I think it's yeah, interesting how it's
Yeah.
fueled by not really quite understanding.
But it's
So
interesting how people's attitude can really be changed, though. I mean, I find that I give a lot of popular science talks, and even through writing my book, if you people are very happy to tell me that they hate wasps, and then I will just explain, well, you know, bees are important in the environment, and so are wasps. They're pest controllers, and people, as soon as they've got a reason to value these difficult facets of nature that they find hard to like, they do tend to come around quite quickly, because I think people are realizing that every part of nature is really important in an ecosystem.
do you find that like every time you give a talk that people always say, I had this traumatic experience when I was X number of years old, and then now I'm going to give this story to you? Do you find that that's a
I
constant thing that
do.
happens?
I have a lot of people, everybody wants to tell me their personal story about wasps, and mostly they are a negative experience, or they want advice on, you know, how do I get rid of the wasps that are outside my house when I'm trying to have a picnic or a glass of lemonade or wine. And that's, I do love hearing people's stories, I have to say, because you do get a real feel for the reasons why people hate wasps. But it's very clear that most people don't realize that I mean, the types of wasps that people meet are in the US, you have a lot of paper wasps, the ones
Hmm.
that the openness, the Polistes wasps, and you also have a lot of yellow jackets and a few hornets. And it's those wasps that tend to nest on your houses or in your shed and places where people hang out. And they do come and bother you in the, you know, when you're trying to eat outside, or you might stumble into their nest or something. But those wasps actually represent a really small portion of wasps. There's over 100,000 species of described wasps, and there are probably 5 to 10 times more species yet to be discovered and described. So that puts into perspective how understudied they are. And also to put in perspective, there are only 22,000 species of bees.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so there's a lot more diversity in wasps. And actually, the majority of wasps don't sting. There are parasitoid wasps, which just have an ovipositor, an egg-laying sheath, in the place of a sting. So the sting is just a modified ovipositor, because the stinging wasps evolved from these parasitoids. And parasitoids lay their eggs inside the prey, inside prey like a caterpillar or a beetle larva, and then the egg will hatch, and the little baby wasp will munch through that living larder. And they actually that makes them really, again, also really important in regulating insect populations and in pest control. And in fact, these parasitoid wasps are farmed in some parts of the world to be
Mm.
released on mass scale into agricultural fields to control as a more sort of environmentally friendly, chemical-free form of pest control. So I think most people, you know, are most people's perceptions of wasps are very much tainted by the handful of species that do end up bothering us, because we don't go out of our way to look for them. But the diversity of wasps is endless in their forms.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, so let me ask you this: after 25 years, do you have a favorite wasp, or is it still
Yeah,
the very first love that you came across in Malaysia?
I do love, to be fair, I do love them all. You know, I have to spread the love. It's like my kids. I don't have any favorites.
Okay, fair enough.
But there are a few that sit in my, you know, strongly resonate with me. And of course, the Southeast Asian hover wasps are just the most lovely, beautiful wasps to work on. But they're a little bit boring, I have to confess. They don't do very, they're not, they never fight really, and they're not, you know, they don't do anything unexpected. The Plistes paper wasps are much more fun to watch. It's
Hmm.
like a little soap opera going on there. And the first Plistes paper wasps that I worked on were in Panama, where I worked at the Smithsonian Institute. And these were quite big wasps, so sort of about 2 centimeters long. And they get quite feisty, but they are lots of fun to watch, and you can manipulate their behaviors and take the queen away, and you get these huge fights. So they're one of my, you know, they're very dear in my heart. And also, we sequenced the genome of that species
Hmm.
in 2015. And it was the first stinging wasp genome to be sequenced. So I feel quite proud of that. So
Wow.
they'll always have a very, very special place in my heart. But actually, I can find a reason to love and champion any species of wasp, you know.
Love that. That's great. Do you have any suggestions for like humans? Like I mentioned, the you do like a Google search and it's just like kill, 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 get rid of wasps. Do you have any like thoughts about like how humans could live more harmonious with wasps, other than just leave them alone and let them do their thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually not, these aren't my suggestions. These are things that people around the world do. I mean, I think in North America and certainly in the UK, we're not very good at living alongside wasps. But if we looked at other countries, like for example, the Argentinians, they have a lot of invasive populations of the Vespular yellow jacket wasps. And what they do to, and they are problematic there, you know, I appreciate that there is a time and a place to kill wasps, and when they're an invasive species and they're detrimental to the environment, then ecosystem, then you do need to try and get rid of them. But in Argentina, where they are so prolific, if they want to go for a picnic or a barbecue outside, they bring along a kind of wasp offering, like a bit of smelly tuna or something, and they'll put it
Oh,
a few, you know, 50 meters away from where they're sitting and having their picnic, and the wasps will go to the smelly tuna and leave them alone. And
huh.
actually, I've seen that done in Europe as well. You know, in the Mediterranean, restaurant owners are very good at working out how to keep wasps away from their customers, and they do exactly the same thing. I've seen plates of cooked ham put out for the wasps, and when we start eating our pizza at the beginning of the meal, there's a pile of wasps on the ham, and then by the end of it, the ham's all gone and the wasps are starting to bother us again. So there's ways of sort of, you know, give them a lure, give them a wasp offering, and you can live alongside them. I mean, I appreciate if you've got a wasp colony in the doorway of your house, or in the loft, or that you've got small children or pets that you don't want to get stung, then that can become a little bit more tricky. And of course, you know, we shouldn't overlook the fact that some people have a very dangerous allergic reaction to their stings. So in those circumstances, of course, you should try and not live alongside the wasps. But most people aren't highly allergic, and there's also ways of not aggravating them. So if there's a wasp at your picnic flying around, then don't wave your hands around and shout at it, because then you're emulating the predators that they have evolved to defend their colony against.
Hmm.
So it
Interesting.
tends to be large mammals like badgers in the UK will dig up wasp colonies, or birds will take wasp colonies that are aerial. And so this sort of movement of limbs, and particularly in the case of badgers, when they're digging up, you've got carbon dioxide, the wasp will respond to that, and it's puffing and panting. So if you're shouting and waving your hands around, then the wasp is of course likely to sting you. But when a wasp comes to the picnic and she looks like she's zigzagging and eyeing you up, she's actually using you as a landmark, because they're very visual, and she's working out what you are as a landmark and where in relation to the food. So she's really not going to she's not out to get you. And just stay still, watch to see what the wasps want, and then just give them a bit. So if they want a bit of your chicken sandwich, just sacrifice a bit of your chicken sandwich for the piece of the picnic.
A little peace offering. I love
Yeah,
that. It's like a little offering to the gods. It's just this little
yeah,
area. I love that.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've got to work
I'm
with them, you know, that it works.
I'm glad you mentioned about the marking because I remembering I watched a video that I think it came out of MIT. It was on YouTube. It was a little tiny video, and it was showing like wasps what their vision is, and then it showed this other thing where the wasp was moving back and forth, and it seemed like the distance it was going back and forth got bigger and bigger, and it sort of made this sort of cone coming back. It's interesting to hear that you're about the measuring. So I'm glad you're
Yeah, no,
reinforcing
exactly.
that.
And in fact, if you watch wasps at their nest, in fact, I was doing this yesterday in London, where we have a nest in on the roof of our apartment where we're trying to monitor it. And as the wasps leave, some of the wasps that have newly emerged, they're quite young wasps. When they leave the entrance to their nest, they will do a little zigzag, and we call it an orientation flight because they're simply working out how can I get back to my nest. Oh, okay. There's a post there, and there's a tree there, and they're just taking in the landmarks. So they leave the nest backwards and they zigzag backwards,
Hmm.
taking in the landmarks. So they're really clever.
Do you know if that's something that's done throughout their whole life? Like it just becomes like habitual when you come back to the nest, you do that same sort of thing and you map your way in,
Well,
like a
once
pilot
they've
going toward the
orientated,
runway.
they tend to be much more in and out quickly. But if you relocate a nest, which is very doable, they will then reorientate. And so they can tell if there's something slightly different, and then they will do a reorientation flight. And that makes sense because, in nature, landmarks change, branches fall down, trees
Mhm.
have leaves one day, and then a few weeks later, they've got no leaves. So they have to be constantly updating the information around them in order to find their nest.
So if the nest is relocated, how does it know that that's its nest? Is it a visual? Is it some sort of a scent, pheromone kind of thing?
There will be a smell of the nest that they will recognize, but they will so they have these sort of, and also the wasps themselves, they have sort of what we call cuticular hydrocarbons. It's like, they have their own individual perfume, and so they will recognize their smell. But if you have multiple nests quite close together, you sometimes find that they will get a bit confused and they'll go to the wrong nest. In fact, bees do this as well. If you have loads of honeybees lined up in hives, they will be drifting between the hives, because they kind of get the landmarks wrong. And actually, what honeybee farmers do is they'll put different symbols or different marks around the hives so that the bees have distinct, unique landmarks for each one of the hives. That's quite a common thing in social insects.
Interesting. And they're just human-made symbols, or
In the case of honeybees, yes, yeah, the beekeepers will put like a triangle above one and then a circle above another, or different colors and shapes.
interesting. Okay. So I guess along this talking about architecture, like what sort of when you think about WASP architecture, like what comes to your mind? Like what are your thoughts about WASP architecture? Just like nothing
Well,
structured here.
I think the most obvious thing about wasp architecture is the hexagonal cells that they build, and which of course is a common trait with honeybees as well. But the wonderful thing about wasps is they do so much more with their nests than bees do. So they create, most of them build nests out of paper, and it's a very sort of durable and versatile material. And the yellow jacket wasps have several different types of paper that they will use within their nest. So these are the ones that build the big sort of football
Mhm.
nests, and then inside, if you opened up the envelope, you'd see all these combs. And so the outside of the nest, the envelope is a very low density paper, which is very quick and cheap for them to make. And that makes sense because they've got to constantly be expanding this envelope to accommodate the growing combs inside. And then inside the combs themselves are a very different kind of paper. They're very, very light, but very um, high tensile strength, and they have to be because they've got to hold the larvae. And once you've got all these larvae in a nest, it can weigh, well, a lot, a few kilograms. It's quite heavy. And then between the combs, they have these struts that hold the combs apart in a sort of space that the wasps can then move between. And that's a really interesting material, actually. I mean, if you try and pull it apart with your hands, you really can't. It's really, really um, plastic, like it's very sort of like a very pliable
A lot of
plastic.
flex to it.
Yeah, so it's just, just within one common yellow jacket wasp nest, you've got all these different types of paper. And then if you look at all of I mean, the near tropics is a fantastically diverse area for wasps, paper wasps in particular, and they build all sorts of crazy shapes and sizes of nests. So some of my favorites are the nests that look like, well, we call them cow pats in the UK, in a cow poo. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sort of like
we
a
call them cow
flat
pats.
disc.
Yeah, I don't know what you call them in the States, but we call them cow pats. And these nests look exactly like a cow pat, and they'll be up against a tree or on the side of a building. And it's just one layer of comb of hexagonal cells built against the substrate like the tree, and then they put this envelope over the front. And what we tend to do as naughty researchers is we peel off the envelope, peel it back so we can watch the wasps, and then we try and pin it back at the end of the day. And by the next day, we'll come along and they've fixed all the holes. They're constantly tending their nest. Yeah, and actually the shape of the nest and the structure of it, the visual appearance of it, is a really useful cue for identifying what species it is, or at least what genus it is. And so often, I'm not a taxonomist, so I'm not particularly good. If you gave me an individual wasp, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you what it is. But if you showed me a nest, I'd probably go, oh yes, that's an apoica nest, or that's an Agelea nest, or a Polybia nest, because it's very characteristic of the shape.
Mm,
So yeah, wasp nests are, I mean, the architecture of wasp nest is really incredible. And I know it's inspired a lot of artists like yourself, perhaps. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, so they're really, and I know some sculptors who have tried to emulate the wasp nest and actually make it out of paper. And then you realize how hard it is.
Right, right. There was a project I saw someone did a few years ago where they actually gave they laid out like sort of damp colored paper, and the wasp they were building, she was building her nest, and she was like, come and grab it, and it was beautiful. There's these little striations of colors going around and around, so you get a
Yeah,
real sense of how it was built. It was very beautiful.
yeah, that's
um
absolutely right. But even I mean, you can do that experimentally in the lab if you've got a wasp, especially the Pleiades nest, the paper wasps. So you can give them different coloured paper, and they'll build these lovely bands of multicolored nest. But you can even see that in a yellow jacket nest. If you have looked closely at the envelope, you'll see, at the end of the winter, when in the middle of the winter, when you can take the nest down, there'll be no wasps in there. You can look at the stripes in the outside of the envelope, and you'll often see like blue stripes and green stripes depending on what fences are
mhm,
painted in your neighborhood. So it
right.
is quite, if you just look closely, you'll see all of those colors just simply in a wild colony of wasps.
Interesting. So do you collect nests? Do you and I guess for me it's like at the end of November I go out and I'll find them in my house, and and pull them off, and
Yeah,
I had this collection of them. I'm just curious because you've been studying for so long. Do you have that?
I do actually. I'm not in my office in London at UCL at the moment. I'm at home, but normally behind me in my office in London is a wall covered in wasp nests. I have a few up here, but they're on my shelf.
Oh, that's okay. I just
Yeah,
was
so
curious.
people do tend to give me wasp nests as well. I'm just trying to see if I've got one here. Yeah, actually, here I've got a little wasp nest just sitting on my desk here. Um, oh, this is that. Yeah, so this is quite sure where this is from, but you can see there's a little wasp nest here. I think this might be from Brazil. Oops, sorry, it's not focusing, is it?
Okay.
I
Oh
think it
wow,
might.
it looks like a leaf.
It
Just
does
sort
look
of
like a leaf, you're right. Yeah. And actually the interesting thing about this, you won't be able to see it very well, but there's I think it's definitely a paper wasp nest itself. But on top of the nest, it was actually a dead nest when I found it. On top of the nest, there is another, sorry, you can't see this at all, can
I
you?
can
But
see
there's
it.
another nest. There's another little clay pot there. Can you see that? I don't know if you
Is it
can.
at the bottom, the cell
Yeah,
at the
right.
bottom? It
Yeah,
looks
right
like
down
it's
here.
dark.
Yes, that's right. This one here. That is another net. That's a solitary wasp, but it's built its cell on top of an abandoned social wasp nest. That's kind of cool. That's why I've got it here.
So is the shape of that, is that like a mimetic thing to look like a leaf to sort of blend in with
Uh,
surroundings?
I think this is actually a bit of a broken old nest. It would have been much bigger. It would have been a much there's the other bit of it actually. The rest of the nest.
Oh, I
It's
see.
a very these were nests that were abandoned quite early on. I think they're probably a miscitrus nest. They're abandoned quite early on. So, but you're right. They probably do look a bit like leaves. And I mean, we often look for wasp nests on buildings because they're easier to spot.
Hmm.
But you're right that if that was hanging in a tree, you'd find it really hard to see. And some of the nests are really cryptic. So yeah, there must have been some selection for looking like a leaf or looking like a bit of bark.
Interesting. Do you, so along the same lines, do you collect, what, do you have like your own specimen wall of wasps?
I have a few. I'm not a great pinner of insects. I'm not, as I say, I'm not a taxonomist. I study their
Sure.
behavior. I have freezers full of wasps at UCL where we study their DNA and their RNA. We look at the genes expressed in their brains. And so I tend to collect for research purposes. I have a few specimens here and there. I've got a little one here that's actually, happen to have it here. This is actually Plistes canadensis. Again, you can't really see it very well, but
Is that a wet species? I can't
yeah,
understand.
it's in alcohol, this one, yeah. And then actually one of the other things I've been doing, these aren't very good specimens actually, is popping them into resin so that
Ah,
people can look at them more carefully.
yeah.
Take these some public talks and stuff. So these are some of my duds actually. They've got lots of bubbles, but these are Bolonogasta from Africa, these wasps here. And so yeah, I like to set them in resin because when you take them along to talks, kids can pick them up and look at them. So yeah, but I don't systematically collect. I'm not really a collector as such, and I'm not very good at taxonomy. It's not really my thing. There's some great people out there who do that, and that's not me.
Yeah. I I only collect what I find. I don't actively like. I don't think I could do like the kill jar with the. I couldn't do that. I would need to just find it and go ooh and then keep it. But um,
Yeah.
so I think this is. I see I get a countdown here on Zoom. Are
Oh,
you still okay to keep talking?
yeah, yeah, we can
Okay.
do that. Yeah.
Um, so one thing I was just kind of shifting gears a little bit. I was going to ask you: are there other ecologically like engaged groups that you talk to, or that you follow on social media, or that you belong to that champion
Um,
wasps?
there aren't many wasp champions out there, I have to confess. I mean, it's changing. I think there are a lot of natural history, um, amateur natural history groups who are very interested in all, aspects of insect life, really. And they will show an interest in wasps. There's a few people that I follow on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling
Whatever
it.
it's called these days.
Everyone says that, Twitter or X or whatever it's called, who are championing wasps along with me. Um, but there are no dedicated wasp conservation programs, or projects as far as I'm aware. There are sort of people who are attempting to do sort of wasp campaigns. There's this amazing guy in the Netherlands actually who goes around rescuing wasp nests. So if somebody needs to get rid of a wasp nest, rather than the pest controllers removing it, he'll go along and he'll relocate it either to his garden or to a forest nearby.
Wow.
And actually, he's created quite a movement in the Netherlands. He's called I can't remember his real name, but on Twitter he's called Vespenfriend. And
Nice.
he's got some fantastic posts showing all of his amazing work that he's doing with wasps. And there seems to be quite an appetite for wasps in the Netherlands. The Germans are also very interested in wasps. And in Germany, wasps are protected. So you can't just kill a wasp
Oh,
nest.
wow.
So they are already quite on board with that. And my book was translated into German actually last year, and it seems to
Nice.
have found its audience there. So yeah, but I think, oh, and the Japanese actually are amazing. So yeah, so no, I take that back. There are definitely organizations in Japan which are dedicated to wasps. I had the great pleasure of going wasp hunting with some of the Japanese Wasp Keepers Association members, who are mostly 80 to 90-year-old men. And it's their hobby, their sport.
Wow.
They lure in wasps with a bit of smelly tuna, again, smelly fish. And then they tie this loop of a ribbon around the waist of the wasp. And then the wasp goes away with a bit of tuna in its mouth back to the nest, and you run after it.
You
So we
just
run
follow
after,
the string.
yeah, you go running after it. And then you have to have several people so that you run as far as you can, watching the wasp. And then when you lose sight of it, you position somebody on that trajectory. And then you bait the wasps again at the beginning, at the start point. And then you shout when they've left, you shout. And then the person at this point knows where to look, and you get a bit further, and gradually you work your way towards the nest. So we did that with them, which was great fun. And they do amazing things with wasps. They rear them like we do honeybees, for their produce, and their produce is food. The larvae are a great delicacy in Japan.
Okay.
And so they eat the larvae, they eat the pupae, they eat the adults, and they rear wasps in kind of a vespary, like we do honeybees. But it's very small scale hobby farming. But they have these wasp festivals where you bring along your biggest wasp nest, and the heaviest one wins the prize. Um,
Are
we do
people
that
dressed up as their favorite wasps and that sort
well,
of thing?
actually, sadly not. I don't think so, but maybe they
Ah,
should. But I've never come across a culture where people are more are actually very had this positive relationship with wasps. I mean, it's not everyone. It's not like all Japanese love wasps, but there are these groups of people who it's quite a new thing. It's just 50 or 60 years old that these mostly men have started at middle age, well, late in life, retired gentlemen who it's like a sport, and they all get together and chase their wasps. It's just beautiful.
wow. Do you have any sense of like how long this has been going on? Has this been for generations or is this more recent?
It's quite recent, yeah. It's only the last few decades, sort of 50, 60 years at the most. So it's quite a new thing. And actually, there are other parts of Asia. I mean, I think, we have a very Western view of what wasps are and what they do for us and stuff. But more generally in Asia, there are other communities that have very strong relationships with wasps. And so the hornet that's been invading the US, the murder hornet, Vespa mandarinia, that's a really big wasp, and it does have a punch of a sting. And like any non-native species, it can cause trouble outside its native environment, but in its native Asia, it is actually a really top predator. It's an important part of the ecosystem. And we hunted those in Japan as well. Actually, that was very cool. They're
Wow.
just beautiful insects. But in parts of India and actually Japan as well, they also farm, especially the rural communities, they farm these wasps for their larvae. And one nest can fetch, I don't know, 500-600 pounds. So whatever that is in dollars, say $800-900. So
Wow.
that's a good income for these communities. So yeah, I think we're missing a trick, really. We should be we should be working with wasps and, farming them for their
Mhm.
food. I think that, entomophagy is the future, more sustainable food production.
I'll be curious to see how that takes off, especially, I mean, Americans like their fast food, so I'll be curious to see if they've got, the Wasp Burger or whatever, the Wasp McNuggets or something like that. But
Yeah. Well, we did. I
um,
mean, we did eat in Japan. We did eat these wasp nori. So the wives of the wasp collectors had made these rice balls wrapped in seaweed, and there were wasp larvae inside it and wasp pupae inside it, and they're great. They were fresh. When you bite into them, you get this sort of explosion of flavour. They're very
wow,
juicy.
I need to go to Japan because I want to try this.
Yeah, you need to.
So, one of the questions I wanted to ask you ever since I read your book. So, in your book, you have a very lengthy conversation with Aristotle about advances in science and the importance of wasps over a very lengthy meal. And I'm just curious, like, are there other historical figures that you would have a conversation with, or when you were writing your book? I'm just curious if there was other people, if there was a short list of like, maybe it's
Ah,
Aristotle, maybe it's someone else. I was just curious.
there wasn't a shortlist. So the Aristotle chapter is the real Marmite chapter. Some people either love it or hate it. And non-scientists tend to like it more than scientists. I think I tried to use it as a literary device to make it a little bit different. And
Mhm.
because when I first wrote that chapter, the first version wasn't like that at all. It was just like the other ones, just a normal straight chapter. But then I thought it was a bit dry, you know, sort of getting towards the end of the book, people might get a bit bored. So I just had this crazy idea of having, because I'd already started talk, you know, Aristotle was clearly part of the chapter and his work and everything. And then I just thought, wouldn't it be funny if I had a conversation with him about it? And it kind of, I wrote a sort of first version and sent it to my editor and I said, is this too crazy? And she said, no, I love it. So I had such fun writing that chapter, and I know nothing. I know very little about Aristotle. I know more now, but you know, I'm not a historian at all, so it was very new to me. So no, I didn't have another list. I would love to write a whole book of conversations with people from the past about advances in science that they've had a role in planting the seed of, because I think would be really fun. But I think at the moment it's too much of a kind of quirky, unexpected way to communicate science, and I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, I think for the non-scientists maybe it's fine, and they can sort of, they like the fictional aspect of it. But I guess the fact is that I'm mixing a bit of fiction, which is my interpretation and my imagination of what Aristotle might have been like, and with the fact, which is the wasp stuff. But if I were to write some more in that style, I would definitely, obviously Darwin. I mean, you know, it's a
Sure,
no-brainer,
sure.
isn't it? But also some of the people that I did write about in my book. So Jean-Henri Faber, the Frenchman who was a school teacher, but also an incredible naturalist. And some of his, I mean, he wrote extensively about natural history and insects in general, but his essays on wasps are really incredible in their detail of the observations that he made, and they are very entertaining to read. I mean, I get the impression he's quite a, you know, crazy Frenchman. He's, you know, sort of very flamboyant. I can imagine him throwing his hands up in the air a lot, you know,
Lots of
and
big
everything very
gestures.
melodramatic, you know. And so I'd love to have a conversation with him. And in fact, it would be easier to have a conversation with him because we know a lot more about him than we do Aristotle and what his personality was like from all his writings. And then I think the other two that I'd like to have conversation with are this pair of American naturalists, the Peckhams. So George and Elizabeth Peckham. So they were naturalists in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they were great advocates of Darwin. And I think they also had a really important role in introducing teaching of evolution into schools in the US at the time. Um, and I just, again, they write in a very kind of florid, flamboyant manner, and their personalities really come across. And I just loved reading about them chasing the wasps through their cornfields,
Mm.
and I can imagine Elizabeth in her big hooped skirt, you know, whatever she's wearing in 1901, running, leaping over hedges and fences, and George Peckham in his, like, you know, his shirt and his tie up here and running along chasing the wasps. Yeah, so the enthusiasm. I mean, it just goes to show that there have been people like me who were as, if not more, enthusiastic about wasps, and they've written about them over 100 years ago, 150 years ago. So I really enjoyed, one of the things I loved about writing my book actually is that I had the excuse to read all of these out of print books on wasps, and it was an absolute joy to sort of try and step into the shoes of those people.
That's wonderful. Um, I really enjoyed hearing about the cornfields in your book and imagining those too. And um, going back to the Aristotle thing, I really liked that, the way that it was fun for me because you kind of set up this like a little bit of a rub between the, you know, then and now, and science then and science now, and I just thought that was great. And hearing you actually do the voices in the book, I thought was really great.
Oh, I can't. Recording the audiobook was one of the most horrific experiences of my life, and I haven't dared listen to it.
Oh, really?
I actually don't know what I sound like.
Well, you sound very much like you sound right now.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. I just sort of the mixed responses to the Aristotle chapter have sort of I don't know, made me think twice about if I write another book, would I be that courageous to do something a bit quirky 3/4 of the way through the book again?
Maybe, but I think your idea about doing that whole book like that could be quite interesting. Just sort of imagining what those conversations would be like. But
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just me. I live half in the fictional world anyway, but that's a whole nother story. Um, so one thing I was going to ask you about, I see the term insect apocalypse a lot in various articles and books, and I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts about this? How does this affect your professional life? How do you feel like it impacts wasps and humans? I know it's a lot of questions in a row. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, the insect apocalypse, I mean, it's a global biodiversity apocalypse, right? I mean, most things are struggling. But it's not a simple story if everything is dying. There are winners and there are losers in the rapid environmental change that we humans are driving. Um, there are certainly some very concerning data sets that do show the evidence that insects are declining. And we know a lot now about what's driving that. So land use change is really important. So, and it does, it's a no-brainer, right? We've destroyed their habitats, we've destroyed their food. It's not a surprise that they're struggling.
Hmm.
Chemical use, and of course, that dates back to Silent Spring from
Joel Carson.
Richard Carson. And we're still screwing the planet by chucking chemicals
Hmm.
at nature, and we know exactly what we're doing, and yet we still keep on doing it. And also now we've got the double whammy of climate change and the fact that it's not just the habitats that are being destroyed and reduced. It's also the fact that the whole phenology of ecosystems is out. So the plants that insects depend on are coming out earlier in the spring because the springs are earlier and hotter. And the whole ecosystem balance is changing. And some insects are better at dealing with that than others. So those that are generalists and can actually, for example, wasps that can hunt a diversity of prey are less likely to be affected than wasps that are more specialist and only have the venom that's able to paralyze a particular type of prey. And so if their prey cycles are affected by rainfall or temperature or whatever else is that was happening, then obviously that's going to affect the wasp populations as well. It's like classic predator prey dynamics. So yes, it's a real thing. Insect declines. It's depressing and it's very, very worrying. And I think it's interesting that people are starting to worry about it now because it's affecting our food supplies, for example.
Right.
And actually, insects and other, the rest of biodiversity as well is sort of being valued in terms of what it does for us. So it's by nature's contributions to people. And it's terribly navel gazing because actually, I think we should be caring about everything, not just the things that matter to our health and happiness.
Sure.
But sadly, humans are so selfish that we just need to be told that this species of bee is essential for making sure you have breakfast in the morning, or this species of wasp is essential to making sure that you don't have aphids eating all of your tomato plants. And it always has to have a link with us, sadly. And to be honest, most parts of nature you probably can eventually link it back to some measure of value to humans. But we lack a lot of the knowledge base for what those organisms do in nature in order to, and so we don't have those stories, we don't have those compelling cases to put forward for why we should conserve a particular species or particular habitat because we just don't have the research base for that. So yeah, the insect apocalypse, I think it's a little bit sensational, but then that's the media for you, right? Unless
True.
you have something sensational, it doesn't actually get noticed. So I think I don't like the term, but I think it's done a service in bringing insects to the top of the agenda and bringing it into the public arena. And so no matter how disinterested you are in insects, you will have seen a headline in the newspaper or heard it on the radio or seen it on the TV that there is cause to be concerned about insects. But it's important to realize that some are doing quite well. And in fact, invasive species, particularly social insects and ants and bees and wasps, actually are very good at adapting to rapid change because they've been translocated by us from one part of the world to another. And you'd think that would then put them in a very difficult situation, a completely different changed environment. But for whatever reasons, they do well. But that's not all species. There are definitely species that are able to rapidly adapt, and other species that are not.
Do you think it's that term has changed people's perspective about insects in general, and maybe liking them more or feeling more of like a compassionate, if to use like a human sort of term about it, or do you think
I think
it's back?
so. Yeah, no, I think so, and I think it's worked especially well for bees, as I said at the beginning, in that the media have helped raise the profile of bees and the plight of the bee. There are lots of popular science books on bees, for example, whereas
Mm,
when I wrote my book proposal for my book, Endless Forms, there were no books on wasps, and in the last few years, there's been another few come out, but there's still hardly any books on wasps. But you trip over books on bees in the bookshop. There is an insatiable appetite for information about bees, and there's the merchandise, the bee merch. Don't get me going on the bee merch, right? You can buy your bee scarf, your bee mug, your bee
right.
socks, your bee hat, everything, your bee shirt, anything. This is a very rare wasp shirt that I'm wearing.
Nice. Is that
You
your
can't get hold
design?
of them. It's hard to find.
Is that your design?
No, no, no. This is just
Oh,
something with the internet. So I can't remember where I got it. It's quite old now, but it's hard to get them.
yeah.
I only wear it for special occasions like wasp interviews.
Thank you.
Uh, but I think, and you also see it, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, you go to a garden centre and you find these bee hotels. You buy these little wooden boxes with lots of bits of bamboo and you put them in your garden and the solitary bees come and nest in them. That's a new thing, right? Just in the last 5 years or so, that's become
Sure.
a real common mainstream thing that everyone has a bee hotel. So I think those sorts of things are changing, and people are planting wildlife meadows. They won't mow their grass to let the
Hmm.
flowers grow for insects. So I think there is a lot of groundswell of interest and concern about insects, and the perhaps that's the silver lining of this kind of over sensationalized headlines that they are managing to do their job, which is to bring it into the public arena. And once there's enough public voice of concern, then politicians start doing something about it.
That sounds very familiar. I'm wondering now if I've heard of bee hotels and that sort of thing. I'm wondering now, like, what could we build for the wasp? It's like, but
Well,
they build their own thing.
well, actually, no. I mean, solitary wasps will nest in your bee hotels, and in fact, I've got a bee hotel purely for the reason that I want wasps.
Um,
And so, rather than putting it in a very sunny place where bees like to nest, I tend to put it in a quite shady place where wasps
hmm,
might like to nest. I haven't had a huge amount of success. I've had a few wasps, but the bees still seem to find it. And just leaving, the same for any other insects really in your garden, just leaving, piles of leaves and wood for them to nest in, because lots of the ground nesting wasps and bees will sort of bury into those areas. But also you've got to make, it's not only about providing, you can provide a lovely bee hotel or a wasp hotel, but if you put it on a sterile lawn, or God forbid a plastic lawn,
oh,
then there's going to be no prey, right? Oh, and there's no
right.
flowers, no food. So you have to give it the full package. You can't just provide it with a home. You've got to also provide it with food. And so the whole, our approach to gardening, it is actually the way that we can do our bit for nature. And so making our gardens a bit more untidy and wilder, and allowing wild patches and allowing the grass to grow and not using chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides is the
Hmm.
one thing that we have control over in our backyards.
One thing I see at least a lot in my neighborhood here in Texas is like the constant mowing and the fertilizer and all that's going on. And the grass has to be like this tall, and it has to be like
Uh,
every Saturday it's being mowed and that sort of thing. And I'm always, I'm not going to challenge somebody on their yard because people take it pretty seriously here, but I just wish that people would mow less, and plant things that are native to the area. And it's like my friend, my house has all these rocks, and there's lots of different pollinating natural or native plants. And I go out there and there's just wasps and everything is just out there, and I love it. But
Right.
I want to add a bee hotel or a
Yeah,
wasp. I'm gonna call it a wasp hotel.
yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's true because I mean we have a very messy front garden, but we just let it grow. But we have this thing in the UK called No Mow May. So in May, the idea is that you don't mow your lawn. So no
Oh,
mow
really?
May. And actually it's been taken off. People do not mow, they're very much more likely to not mow in May. And it's wonderful because everything grows and it's all beautiful. And by the end of May, there's all these beautiful flowers and it's buzzing with insects. And then the 1st of June, everyone gets their mowers out and cuts it all down. And like, it's so depressing.
Yeah.
But what is it becoming increasingly common is that people leave patches. So they might not want to leave the whole of their garden to go wild, but they might leave a sort of mow round an area that then is a patch of wildflowers. And that actually looks really beautiful. You've got your little path around it. It's just really lovely. So I think our approach to gardening is changing.
Well, that's good. I don't really have a barometer for what that's like changing in the US, because it seems like the yard is it's like an extension of you and how you want to present yourself out there to the world. Like, look how neat and tidy my yard is. Imagine how neat and tidy my house is, or something
Right.
like that. And I wish that people would just leave it alone, but
Yeah.
a whole nother
Well, our
that's a
house
whole
is
nother
very messy as well. So messy yard, messy house, messy
right.
people.
Well, messy studio, as you can tell behind me. Um, Um, well, I wanted to ask you, do you have any other, what's your next upcoming project? What are you working on? Unless it's secret, you don't want to talk about it. Just curious.
Well, I'm very much back to my day job, and which is being a professor at UCL and running my research group and supervising students and postdocs and writing grants. So I've been very busy doing that. I'm actually on sabbatical this term, which is very exciting.
Oh, wow.
And
Congratulations.
so my plan is to write a book proposal, and I have ideas, lots of ideas, but I can't share them yet.
Oh, that's fine. I was just curious. And,
Because they'll probably change anyway. So even if I did tell you about them now, they'll probably change. But yeah, that's my plan. I'm definitely itching to write another book. I absolutely love writing my book. And so I really do want to write another one. It's a lot of work though, writing a book. And
yeah,
it's you become quite obsessed about it. So, is that healthy? I'm not sure.
well, but it shows
Yeah,
how invested you are. And, if it's anything like me with like, I have a new idea and they usually come very late at night, and all of a sudden I'm like, I can't go to sleep because I'm laying there and I'm building in my head and I'm thinking and I'm like, I might as well just get up and get to work. Um,
yeah,
so I imagine it's probably similar
yeah,
type of
yeah.
type of thing.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So I know I think that's why I've sort of delayed it for so long, because I know that once I start, I will become obsessive and I'll become a very bad mother again.
Wow. Well, I think that was kind of all my questions for you, but I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk. And this is really wonderful, and I think it's going to add another layer to the project. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing what your next book is going to be, The
Yeah.
Big Secret.
Oh, thank you. And I can't wait to see your finished product of your sort of wasp house morph.
Nice.
And it sounds amazing. So yeah, super. And we
I'll
need
send
more
you.
people like you to be kind of, thinking about wasps in a more artistic way and bringing that, because that will resonate with people in a different way than just telling them that they are pest controllers or pollinators. I think, people can see them as the beauty of what they can do. I think that's a really good thing.
Well, I'm trying. Like you said, it's an uphill battle because wasps have a bad PR. So maybe
Yeah.
we need to hold like a fake press conference with a wasp. And
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's the era of the wasp. I think there's a groundswell of enthusiasm. It's just like when people feel brave enough to speak out that they actually do like wasps, then the wasps will reign.
we need T-shirts that like brand us that like wasp is live or whatever. All right.
Something like that. Anyway, good luck with your project. I hope it goes really well.
Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time. And I'll be in touch with images.
Indeed, do let me know. Yeah,
All
fantastic.
right.
I will help promote it on social media if you send me some photos and
Uh,
stuff.
so I wanted to ask you about that. I meant to ask you. You had the hashtag Wasp Love.
Well, it's not my hashtag. I mean, it's a
Oh,
hashtag that so I didn't actually I know who started it up. If you want somebody else to interview, it's Amy Toth, who's a professor at University of Iowa, and she's also like me. She's a WASP researcher. I think she and her postdoc was Jenny Jant, who's now a professor in New Zealand. They kind of came up with it and put it on social media, and I just adopted it.
oh,
So
okay, okay.
the credit goes to
I'm
Amy. Yeah. But no, I mean,
okay.
I think it's really taken off. I think a lot of people are using it now. So Wasp Love is a good, yeah, hashtag Wasp Love.
Okay, well, maybe I'll have to think about that. Maybe I'll reach out to her. Would you mind sending me her contact or her
Yeah,
name and I
I
can
can send
contact her?
you her contact details. Yeah, no, she's equally enthusiastic. I think she works more on bees now as well, so she can balance the stories. But yeah, no, she's the origin. She's the originator of the Wasp Love hashtag.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't spend enough time on Twitter or X or whatever it's called. So, all right. Okay. Well, thank you so
Okay,
much for your time. I really
you're
appreciate it. It
welcome.
was really lovely to meet you, and I look forward to your next book.
All right, thanks a lot.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye.
Bye.